Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. This is Alex2K, and we're going to be rendering the particles that we had from the last tutorial. If you guys remember this guy, um, like I mentioned before, there's a couple of ways to render particles. You have either hardware rendering and you have software rendering. Now, these types of particles, remember, they are hardware. Anything that's a cloud or a tube or blobbies is software. So these guys are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to talk about those. Let's talk about hardware. Alright, so as I mentioned, there is two types of renderers for when it comes to hardware rendering. One of them is the Maya hardware, which you can access by just going to render using Maya hardware. And let me just press play here for a second. And there we go. So there's my particles. Let's play it a little bit longer, like that. And if I go ahead and render them, they look pretty much just like you see them in the what's it called, in the preview, in the in the camera view. Now, as far as the render settings, they're a little bit different. It's not so much different though. In this case, you have presets for quality. You have samples, and the more samples you have, the nicer they look. And you have a frame buffer, but we don't really need to worry about that. What you have when it comes to particles is, via the Maya hardware, is the option for them to be motion blurred. So if I press the motion blur here, and this sort of depends on the amount of samples you have, is to get all the way to that point. Just gonna play it in. There we go. You can see that there's a little bit of motion blur, but you know, this render took 14 seconds, so it's a little bit slow in the regard of my hardware. But if we use the other option, which I like better, which is under the rendering editor's hardware render buffer, then you can see I click here and it's going to render that. And as far as the render attributes, it's a little bit different. By default, the file name says IM, so you know, it's a good idea to change it. I'll call this particles. And there's an extension, start from and end frame, of course, by frame. And there is some presets here for sizes, which if I select, these are some of the presets that you have there: 640 by 480, you have HD, 720, HD, 1080, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to keep it at 640 by 480. Multipass rendering. So that's if I do the multiple rendering, you'll see what happens. It's just doing that. But once I give it a motion blur, let's say of 5, then there we go. So you can see that nice motion blur that they're giving them, and the more samples, the better it ends up looking. See? So it's pretty straightforward. It's not so complicated. As far as an alpha, you can tell it to read the hardware alpha, and that a lot of times just works really nicely. So I'm going to pause this tutorial, just going to make a little render of let's say 200 frames. So start frame 1 and frame 200 by frame 1, IFF 640 by 480 hardware alpha with, that's it. There's this option that says geometry mask. In the case you have a geometry, I'm just going to move this over here to the side for a second. If I had a geometry, say here in front, right, with the geometry mask option, what it does when it renders is going to, there we go, it's going to mask that, make that as a mask, so you can see that it's masking out the particles that are behind, so it's pretty handy in that case. So again, I'm going to pause this tutorial. I'm just going to send out the render and come back. Or actually, let me try it. And if I see that it's taking too long, I'll pause the tutorial. So let's just go render attributes. Let's delete this guy over here. Render attributes 1 to 200 by frame 1, hardware alpha. And let's just go ahead, and how you render the sequence, you just go render, render sequence. And it will start rendering from frame 1, so you can see the progress of what that's doing. So it's just adding all that motion blur in the case that they need the motion blur, and it makes them look a lot nicer. This is pretty good for any fast moving particles. Alright, let's just press escape and let's go ahead and open up that render sequence. File, open animation. So you can see how they got that nice motion blur going on. So anyway, that concludes this tutorial. I hope it wasn't too boring. I'm sure I'll get a little bit, it'll be more exciting next time. So until next time, enjoy. Bye.